Today I'm here with Mike Davis, who owns his own law practice, and I've known for several years now, many years actually, a business attorney here local in Denver, Colorado. And I remember, Mike, one of the first time we met, you said you help business owners get into business, stay in business, and get out of business. And
Correct.
yeah, and so I think, that's a tagline that really stays with people and I think is now
Yeah.
more important and relevant than ever, right? I think we're going to see
Right.
people, maybe needing to exit the business. I think we're going to see a lot of people wanting to start up a business as well. And I think
Hmm.
a lot of business
Right.
owners are wondering, how am I going to stay in business? So
Hmm.
so we'll have a conversation about how the current impact of coronavirus is affecting small business owners, especially through the lens of uh, the legal side, and kind of talk about some of the questions business owners are having right now, some of the questions they should be asking themselves right now, and just get some expert advice or insight from you, and hear from you the conversations that business owners are in. So I'm really excited uh, for this conversation, and thank you for making time for being with me today.
Well, and I think, as we talked before, I think your input, I tend to see things from one standpoint. I think your input is extremely valuable too, because, people have to make decisions about their businesses, and that requires a business analysis that somebody like you provides. So.
Yeah, good. So, Mike, what has the last couple of weeks been like for you? Like, what conversations have you been in, and what conversations are you anticipating to be in?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because my client mix is different now than it's going to be. Right now, I actually have a lot of construction clients, and people in the construction business are still working and still getting paid. So those clients are still very active. I also have several cases involving litigation that with business people that are just proceeding along, and the people who are paying for the litigation still have money to be able to pay for it. I know one client right now is involved in buying a new business, and but it's he does he puts up concrete pads for solar, for solar and wind energy, and his business is booming, and it's government related, and he's getting paid and things like that. So, and he's buying another business, and it's a complicated transaction, but so that's an example of, there are businesses that are still, functioning and still doing well. So I would anticipate there's going to be some issues with small businesses, though, retail, restaurants, things like that, and individuals. So.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of challenges are you anticipating small business owners to have at this point?
Well, they're going to have, I think they're going to have, the first issue that they're going to have is, what are they going to do with the lease if they have, so if they have a space, they have to continue to pay the lease. And so, and landlords are, depending on the type of landlord that you have, whether it's a big landlord or a small landlord, it sort of like ripples up. They have to make mortgage payments. You have to make lease payments. So that's really the first area that people are going to have issues in.
I mean, it's a big conversation right now. You see it in the news, whether or not Cheesecake Factory is going to pay their rent, whether or not like big retailers are going to pay their rent. And I think with right now, today is Monday, March 30th. So I think rent payments and lease payments are due in days, right? So that's a big question for business owners. Should I pay rent? Should I contact a landlord? Like, is it a unique situation, or is there a general advice that's relevant for most business owners at this point?
No, it's just, you have a landlord, you have to talk to the landlord. It's that simple. The landlords though fall into two categories. One are the more personal landlords, the individual owner landlords who may own a building that you have a space in. But the other landlords are large national landlords who have a big portfolio of business, and those landlords just don't care. They handle things automatically, and so their collection practices are automatic. Their eviction practices are automatic. They have the same firms do them all the time. So, those landlords are just not interested in they have an automatic process, and discussing things with them isn't really worth it. Although, you can give it a try, but, and in terms of the lease, I don't think it's this month that's going to be the problem. It's going to be next month, because this is going to go on for another 30 days. People just lost their cash, within the last 4 weeks, but they probably they've got enough hanging around to, make it for another 30 days. It's really after that's where the problem is going to be. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for our clients, we've pretty much recommended to all of them to contact a landlord and start some kind of conversation about how we could work together in terms of either reducing rent, extending the lease, but maybe deferring the payments. And we've gotten mixed results, I would say. I literally had one client that preemptively had a landlord send out an email saying, "Don't dare asking for a reduction," which tells you where they're standing, and probably, looking at their situation, that was a necessary move. I don't think it's just a cold-hearted move per se, but there's reasons for that. And then we've had landlords that are very willing to negotiate, that are maybe able to take advantage of some of the government programs that are out there to help ease their liabilities and pains, and are really wanting to work with a tenant. And I do think that in the long run, tenants at this point, or landlords, want to keep their tenants in, even though they might miss a payment or have to accept a reduction of a payment or deferment, because we do think there's going to be a lot of retailers and a lot of tenants that are not necessarily going to make it out of this crisis. And I think that where in Denver, the leverage has really been on the landlord side for many years. It's now kind of like shifting towards, okay, as a tenant, you actually have some more leverage in this conversation as well.
Yeah, and really from a policy standpoint, what the best thing that could have been done was to have 90 days of rent forgiveness and mortgage forgiveness, because the landlord, so there's a big difference between a landlord who owns his building and doesn't have a mortgage on it, and a landlord that has a mortgage on it that has to make his mortgage payments. Although it's a lot more difficult to foreclose on a mortgage than it is to evict a tenant. So evicting a tenant is a pretty quick process. Foreclosing on a mortgage takes 7 months. So, the landlords with mortgages have more leeway than you might think, but they're ultimately concerned about what could come down the road if they can't make a mortgage payment. So the other thing is, and this is sort of and this is from experience, there are typically 2 places that retail businesses can borrow from before they go on to the next level, which would be, banks, credit cards, things like that. One is don't pay your rent. The other is don't pay your taxes. You're obligated to pay your taxes. And I would never advise somebody not to pay taxes. But the reality is that the IRS collecting taxes right now is very delayed, and will be more delayed as this goes on. It could take a year for the IRS to come around to collect taxes that aren't paid. And after that, they would give you a 36 to 60 month payment plan. So businesses that have cash shortages typically look at two places to borrow. One is the landlord and the other is taxes. And as I tell people when they come to visit me at that point in time, I always ask the question, did you pay your taxes? They go, yes. Did you pay your landlord? They go, no. I go, that's the wrong answer because you have to pay your landlord to continue functioning. The IRS is actually somebody that you can actually work with. So
yeah.
that's really contrarian advice, I can tell you, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Good. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, I think, as it relates to leases and interacting with the landlord. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the landlords are anticipating those conversations as well.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, a little earlier you mentioned that you anticipate, or from what you're seeing, cash, we still had about 2 solid weeks in March of like being able to
Mm-hmm.
do business for most businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some cash in the bank, but at this point, it's some point throughout April, we're anticipating most small business owners running out of cash.
Right.
So then the question is, there's funding programs that are coming down, that are available right now. Some of them are more structured like a grant. Some of them are really loans at reasonable interest rates. But it's that immediate, it's the immediacy of cash that's needed for certain business owners that I know from years in the industry, where people get like really creative, and start borrowing from less traditional sources. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's friends and maybe it's friends, maybe it's family, maybe it's their own retirement funds that they're able to pull from. Is there anything that you can say about, specifically when you borrow money, what you should pay attention to from a legal perspective, especially? Oh, go ahead.
Well, the real things to pay attention to are, personal obligations. When you borrow money for a business, and ultimately the money that you borrow is going to land as a liability personally. So you always have to look at how can you deal with those liabilities that you incurred in the event that things go wrong. And so there's the traditional sources would be family and friends, or credit cards. And so let me say something about credit cards. Obligations to family and friends are something that will follow you around for the rest of your life and affect every dinner or date or gathering that you ever have with them, because they're always going to want to know where the money is. Credit cards, on the other hand, believe it or not, are, in my opinion, good places to borrow from, even though they are high interest. What you can do is you can find a credit card that has a 0% interest over a period of time and pay it back with that way, by balance transfer. The other thing about credit cards is that they're not very good at collecting. They have a process where, so they'll start bothering you for the 90 days if you don't make a payment. At 6 months, they send it out to a secondary collector. A year later, the secondary collector sends it out to a tertiary collector, and on and on. And so, and during that time, they're negotiating the balance down almost to 50%. So you can actually pay the credit card off at much less. Now, it takes them about 3 years to get around to suing, where they can actually establish the obligation. Now, the bad news about that is, of course, it trashes your credit in the interim. Mm-hmm. That's a short-term solution, but I think it's an assessment that you have to make in terms of the viability of your business and whether your business is going to change, or what's going to happen. I mean, we kind of talked about that. You really assess the viability.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting time right now to be in, because while we've just gotten the news, I think last night, that this period of the direction of like stay-at-home orders is going to be extended through April. I think a lot of business owners, really have to be in this conversation now after the first week or two of just like disbelief and shock of like what was actually happening and traveling so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like really figuring out, do I have a viable business model moving forward? How do I need to adapt? How do I need to change? How do I need to innovate, reinvent, and really come up with a completely new game plan going forward? Knowing that the landscape is uncertain, even right out of the gate, knowing that the landscape is going to change even after the initial stay-at-home is going to be lifted. It's not going to be the same business landscape, society. The behaviors are not going to be just the default natural behavior of the consumers that we had before. So there's a lot of unknowns in all of this, and the question I think a lot of business owners is it worthwhile keeping my business afloat going through this period of time, and am I going to have a winning business model coming out of it? Because only then would it make really sense to go into further debt, to really take on that responsibility. And I think it's a unique situation for any business owner, but it's a very important conversation. I don't think the default should just be, let's just get through this, we're in this together. Like, that's kind of a mentality as a business owner that can be dangerous if you're not innovative and really looking at what really is your predicament. I don't know. That's the conversation we're in a lot.
Yeah. And this is going to change a lot. I mean, I can tell you right now that in terms of the law practice, this is changing everything radically, because people that are in the law are very, very attuned to going to an office and doing work there. And nobody's at an office now, and it's not affecting anything. My wife is involved in the medical services industry. They had never had telemedicine before. Now they have it, and now they like it. So it's really going to change. Those are just small examples, but there's really going to be a lot more changes besides that. I wanted to mention one other thing where we're talking about traditional sources of money. You're talking about borrowing on retirement accounts and things like that. So ultimately, if a business goes down and you have too much debt and so forth and so on, you can't pay it, rather than get judgments against you and garnishments and things like that, people look to file bankruptcy. And there's a lot of things that bankruptcy can do, not only liquidation but reorganization. But there are priorities under the law that people have for certain of their assets. And one of the things that's absolutely a priority that creditors can't get their hands on are retirement accounts and 401ks. And so I once had a case where the wife had a dress shop, and it just wasn't making it, and they had borrowed money on their home and so forth and so on. The guy had $700,000 in a 401k, and they did not borrow against it. Actually, they came to me and said, "Should we borrow against it?" And I said, "No, file bankruptcy, get rid of your debt, and keep the $700,000." And they couldn't believe that they could keep the 700. I go, "Oh yeah, it's exempt under the bankruptcy code." So there are certain exemptions under the bankruptcy code that you really have to evaluate. And because the 401k and IRA is an asset that creditors can't get to, you should never use that. I know that's a source of that's something that a lot of franchisors really say, well, just borrow money on your 401k, and do something like that. And because it's exempt from your creditors, if things go bad, you'll always have it. So
well,
probably
really
not the greatest.
it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I think even just this last week, the government has eased some of the penalties
Yeah,
as it
they did.
relates to drawing money out. So now the temptation is even greater to actually,
Mhm.
it's like right there as an easy source of money without a lot of penalties. So
Yeah, specifically, they extended the deadline. You can pull money out, and you don't have to put it back for 3 years before you incur the penalty. So that's good, but it doesn't change the priorities. It doesn't change the priorities in bankruptcy, which says that any money that you have in a 401k is absolutely exempt. And if you borrowed money from your 401k and things didn't work out, you would have the obligation to not only your creditors, but also to pay it back to your 401k, and that doesn't go away. So, you know.
So how does a business owner, I do want to talk in a little bit about, there's business owners for whom there's tremendous opportunity to move forward and really reinvent
Yeah.
themselves, create new business model, new revenue streams, all of that. So I think there's a lot of good things happening as well right now. But again, especially in the service and the hospitality and the travel industries, there's business owners that are really facing with whether or not we're going to have a business moving forward. And one of the things that I think a lot of business owners are situated in is just the default way of stopping a business unless you can sell it is to file for bankruptcy. Somehow it's like in the language, I think I need to file for bankruptcy, which is really a distinct event, different than actually closing down the business or shutting it down. And so how would you advise a business owner to think about what scenario is the right scenario for them?
Well, so the percentages of people who come to me that say they want to file bankruptcy, and the people that I actually file for, I actually file bankruptcy for probably about 30% of them, which means 70% are not filing. They're doing other things. They're doing workouts, liquidations, accommodations on loans over time, things like that. So, there's a reason for that, and the reason why is that bankruptcy is expensive, it's complicated, and it involves a complete loss of control of all of your assets, because you have to, in order to get the advantages of bankruptcy, you have to disclose everything, and not only disclose everything, but have it under the jurisdiction of the bankruptcy court. So, bankruptcy is not the best idea all the time. There are certain circumstances when it works, but there's a lot of other opportunities to work things out than one might imagine. And part of that includes engaging in, when your creditors come after you and sue you. Part of it involves engaging in litigation and settling for less than full money on the dollar and all that kind of stuff. And in that process, what happens in that process is you buy time. And if you can buy time, then you're still in the game. I analogize it to playing poker. If you've still got chips, you're still in the game. So anything can happen. So, and so the default position, the bankruptcy is the thing to do, is actually not, it requires a more sophisticated analysis than that.
Yeah. And that's something that you also do, obviously, and advise business owners on, if that's a conversation that they're in. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's helpful to have somebody like you involved, because I can buy all kinds of time one way or the other, but I can't fix their business. And so fixing the business or getting into a new business or something like that is absolutely essential. So
good. Yeah, I know this is the month of truth, I think, for a lot of business owners as well.
It is absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah.
good.
You're the truth department, right?
We're trying to be. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns too, for sure.
I'm the cleanup guy. You're the truth department.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. There's businesses, first of all, that are actually doing really well right now, and I think there's businesses also that that understand that this is an interruption, but they have a solid business model. They were have a good team in place. They're able to navigate this by running a lean and agile company, and they really want to think about, how do I position myself in a good way coming out of this? I think the speed of recovery for any business is going to be critically important, because you don't want it to be a long, drawn out process after this initial crisis is over. So with some of our clients, we're in conversations around, there have been projects that have been on the shelf for sometimes years as it relates to cleaning up shop, cleaning up the business, getting better practices in place, getting better procedures in place, contracts in place, everything that usually we had a hard time getting to because daily operations and just life as a business owner usually gets in the way. And so one area that we're looking at with all of our clients is, as it relates to the legal protection of your company, which sometimes or often never makes it to the top 3 of the priority list, unfortunately. What are some projects that you could be working on or should be working on right now, because you actually have time, because you have your staff that's not operating at 100% and all of that?
Right. Well, one of the things that's most important is that when people start a business, they usually pick an entity to either a corporation or an LLC, depending on how they want the tax benefits of it to go forward. But when people do that formation, they don't complete it. So they'll start an LLC, they'll do the articles of organization, they'll get the FEIN number, but they won't do an operating agreement. And so when an entity, let's say you have you have a creditor who you owe money to that you didn't personally guarantee, if you don't have an operating agreement or do the corporate formalities, which actually requires an annual shareholder meeting and board of directors meeting to show that you actually observed those corporate formalities, that is, that's a problem. So that's one of the things that business owners should be doing, is they should be making sure that all of the corporate formalities that they have to observe, whether it's an LLC or a corporation, that they make sure that they have it. The reason why people pick an LLC is because the form of an LLC is simpler. There's fewer requirements to it. You have to have an operating agreement, but you don't have to have annual meetings or anything like that. With a corporation, typically it'd be a subchapter S corporation for small businesses. You have to have a corporate book, and you have to have shares of stock. And I mean, these are, they sound like insignificant, dumb things, but in litigation, ultimately, they're actually very important, because you set up the entity to protect you from liability. If you don't go all the way through and have all the corporate formalities, then it's like not having an entity at all. So
which then opens up the protection or compromises the protection between your personal assets and the business. Yeah. Yes,
exactly. It just exposes, you individually to what we call alter ego claims. I have a rather sizable alter ego case going on right now, and we're looking for the corporate book. I don't have a corporate book. Where is it? So,
I can't tell you also just over the years how many clients we've had that were partnerships, with several owners that really never finalized their partnership documents, and said, we got it prepared, we got it printed, but we've never signed it, for example. Or I also, right now, we're with one of our clients, we're in the process of really updating their service agreements as it relates between them and their customers, because it's always been maybe a little bit more than just a handshake agreement, but also not much more than a handshake agreement. And I think there's a lot of vulnerability, and we're always working with our clients through the lens of how can you increase the value of your company, and ultimately how can
Mm-hmm.
you move towards a company that is sellable if you want to sell. And
Sure.
and buyers are always looking like, how are you protected? How is your revenue protected? What are your contracts like? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of like go through your contracts right now and fine tune them and
Mm-hmm.
put them in
Yeah.
place where you haven't, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And to use the example of a partnership agreement or a partnership, partners are usually formed because, people put, there's usually an operating person, and then there's investors, but they don't just want to be, they want to be partners. They don't want to just be an investor. In the event that things go wrong, that partner who was also an investor, if you don't have something in writing saying he was a partner, he would be an investor and he gets paid back. So, and even though partnership law is, like a lot of people don't have partnership agreements. I just drafted a partnership agreement for a client, and there's a 3-page partnership agreement and there's a 15-page partnership agreement. Depends on what it is that you want. The 15-pager discusses every eventuality that may happen if a partner leaves or who can buy them out, things like that. But but just making sure that a partner is a partner and not just an investor is actually a really important thing, So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially when the landscape shifts as it does right now, all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like the tension that can arise or the complications that can arise because status quo is not status quo anymore, and we can't just pretend everything is okay. Um, yeah, can be very challenging.
And one of the things that I wanted to comment on that we were talking about before is, what are we talking about in terms of cash needs? This to me feels like 911. I was an attorney and a bankruptcy attorney in 911, and so what happened was, people just didn't do anything for 90 days. I mean, they didn't go out. They didn't. I mean, there was a huge sucking sound in terms of cash for businesses. And then the next 90-day period is when those businesses were picking up the pieces, from that. So it was a good 6 months before, they were able to really get back to where they had been before. And this feels a lot like that to me, in terms of how much cash does a business need in order to be able to function over that period, So
Yeah.
Is that what do you see in terms of the timing of this?
I would probably agree. I mean, it really depends on the industries, of course, because there's industries that are not affected at all. But I think for the ones that are majorly affected, I think about 90 days before we're going to see some kind of back to, at least we can see the path to a certain new normal at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is no question that we, with all of our clients, we go through the expenses line by line, and really
Right.
what can we negotiate? What is really important?
Mm-hmm.
Is this essential? Is it not? Do we get a good ROI on that money spent? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think now we're really, I want to say the last 2 weeks was kind of like difficult to even anticipate how long it's gonna be like this. Now we can forecast a little bit with more clarity, and I think about 90 days is a realistic scenario before we get back to some level of normalcy. I don't think we're going to have normalcy until we have a vaccination, immunization.
Yeah. But I think the process that you go through with them, which is a budget, they have to know, you can't assess what your exposure is or how much you need until you have a budget.
Yeah.
And so that budget should rule.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even in companies that that go through you know, bankruptcy reorganization, as part of the plan of reorganization, we have to submit a budget. And so the budget really should rule.
Yeah. I mean, we start out right now with a week by week budget projection as a
Yeah.
starting point, and then, you know, go from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, you know, that process is understandably subject to conditions, but at least if you have a model, you can assess what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's not the clients that we're working with, but business owners that have reached out to us since this all happened. It's surprising, like, how little forecasting, you know, a lot of small business owners are doing, or understand how to even think about what's going to happen if we.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
So, yeah. So, Mike, what do you think about, you know, with unemployment like spiking? We have, I think, 3 million people that filed for unemployment. A lot of it might be temporary, but I think as we're looking at really changing the landscape, like you were talking about attorneys who might not go back into the office anymore, who might be working from home, who might, a lot of white collar companies are looking to operate leaner operations as well. And there's no doubt there's going to be people that are unfortunately going to see themselves not having a job anymore, or wanting to make an adjustment. So I do think we're going to see an increase in new businesses that are going to get started. You know, it might not be right now, but towards the third and fourth quarter of the year, for sure. What are some things that you talk about with new business owners that's critically important in the very first stages of getting their business started?
Well, you know, there's really just two things, in my opinion. The first is set the business up right. Make sure that you make sure that the business is, you know, that if it's an LLC, that you go through the process of setting up the LLC so that it's treated as a subchapter S corporation, so that it files a separate return, things like that. Or a corporation or a subchapter S corporation, you know, depending on, you know, what it is. Make sure that it's set up right, because then the entity protects you from personal liability. You know, and then the second thing is, you know, there's going to be a lot of, this is not a one-way street. You know, it's going to be a two-way street. And you know, a business is one thing. A business that you have to put a personal guarantee on, that's a whole different thing. So the first thing that you should be negotiating is not having a personal guarantee, because setting up the business right and not having a personal guarantee on anything, and that allows you to sleep at night, basically, because you have the entity that protects you from liability. Not giving personal guarantees is if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's the business and the business assets that go to pay creditors, not you individually. So, and that negotiation, I would imagine, would be really important going forward, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want new businesses to work with them, you know. So those are really the two things, you know.
Good.
I mean, when you've got, you know, when you talk about, you know, when you talk about where does money come from and what do you use it for, there are 5 things that you use money for: food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and utilities. And you can pay those. You know, maybe you get Netflix or something, but you know, the rest of it's just extra money. And so make sure that the ability to pay for those 5 essentials aren't impaired by a personal guarantee on a business.
And then on the flip side, also in leaner times, people are less willing to spend money on these more discretional expenses. So, you know, where people were happy to buy like luxury items or luxury classes, etc., because there was money there to be spent. I would
Mhm.
I would anticipate that anyone that's been impacted, which is most of us, are going to be much more careful in allocating where money is going to flow out of the household and therefore where money is going to go into the economy. So I wouldn't think it's going to be a good time to necessarily start out your arts project class and things that are just not necessarily an essential item. So if you're able to focus on
Yeah.
what are the needs of our society at this point going forward, it's going to be a safer bet
Hmm.
than turning
Sure.
a hobby into a business.
Yeah. It's, you know, um, that's your job. Good luck. Good luck choosing good luck choosing something that's gonna actually have some viability to it going forward. In my experience, one of the biggest problems with planning anything like that, it's not whether the economy is good or bad. I mean, right now the economy is bad, so it's pretty easy to apply a large, a large analysis. But the rate of change is now amped up to the point that businesses are subject to that rate of change, and that can be a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think most of the conversations we're in right now are recurring. I mean, absolutely, you have to have a digital presence at this point. If you
Hmm.
if you don't have that, yeah, I think now it's just forced in a certain way to
Sure.
any kind of cash or consumer interaction or anything.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big driver. Always has been recurring revenue. What if you're rethinking your business model? Can you rethink your business model in a way to create a recurring revenue stream for your
Hmm.
business?
Hmm.
And then the third area we're really focusing in on is like the cash flow through the business. So making sure our contract service agreements are written in a way where most of the cash is coming in at the beginning of the transaction, where you're not floating 30, 60, 90 days of operating expenses before you actually get
Yeah.
paid. And I think that's what we're seeing now with the businesses that have not collected money up front or were not really on top of
Hmm.
collecting invoices in a timely manner. They have the double whammy, not getting the sales in the first place, but then also being out. And now they haven't gotten paid. And now their clients are pushing that further out. And so it just double impacts them. So
Right. And a good example of that is, of course, Amazon. Amazon in relation to big box retail. Amazon has really changed that whole environment. But it's interesting that there are certain big box retailers who are setting up a pretty strong online presence and actually doing better because of that. Walmart, Target, places like that, because it's one thing to buy, but it's another thing to touch and feel and buy. And so a lot of companies are realizing that, touching and feeling and buying is better than just, taking a shot. And, it's one thing to buy hand sanitizer from Amazon. It's a whole nother thing to buy a suit from Amazon.
yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a black and white situation, but and there are places in that paradigm to actually where there are possibilities. There's holes. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's for sure with our clients, we're focused on how do you need to reinvent yourself? How do you need to innovate? And especially even some of our catering companies and restaurants, that have been on the fence of
mhm.
doing takeout orders or having a different kind of presence. Now is the time, and they're in like 1 week, they're getting done what they thought was going to take them like half a year to implement. Just
Yes.
out of necessity at this point, and they're really happy about it, or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Same thing. I was shocked at how many law firms had to, when this happened, had to set up virtual, the ability to log in and do things. But they did it, and I don't think they're ever going to go back. I think they're going to look at flexibility and space in a whole different way.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of, this is a paradigm shift in terms of the way people think and spend. And that's, I kind of think it was coming anyways. This is, forced the whole thing,
Good. Well, it's definitely exciting times ahead for all of us. I think it's a time where the ones that are really stepping up and taking the opportunity are gonna able to navigate through this in a really good way, and like always in a crisis, take advantage of the opportunities that are there. And then there's going to be ones that fail to adapt, and we'll have to navigate, see what that happens with them. Unfortunately.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah.
Good. So Mike, thank you so much for this discussion. I think that was really valuable. And
Sure.
I think if people have questions, anything related, legal advice, obviously, where's the best way to reach out to you?
Call me on my phone, 720-361-6036. Okay. I don't have, like I've gone virtual, so I answer the phone.
No in-person consultations anymore. No.
No, that's right. It's all, I can Zoom somebody or do whatever. I'm sure that'll change, but yeah, just call. That's the most important thing.
That's awesome.
I do this. This is my signal. Just call me. That's what I tell my clients. Just call me. I don't charge for phone calls.
That's great. Good.
All right.
Okay. Thank you again, Mike, very much.
Really okay. Thanks, Simon. Okay.
Okay.
All right.